I was used to invisible men. That's what you learn when you work the Grand Palazzo's private floors. The wealthy don't want to be seen, and we're trained not to see them, blend into the walls. Remember orders, not faces. Forget everything by dawn. My name is Zara. I'd been working the hotel for 3 years, saving for a visa application that would take me away from Istanbul, away from my mother's apartment, where nothing ever changed except the seasons, away from the weight of understanding too many languages that nobody wanted to hear. The evening of November 14th started like any other. I was clearing glasses from the executive lounge when my supervisor, Karim, appeared beside me with the particular tension that meant something had shifted. The penthouse security team wants someone who speaks Russian, he said quietly. They're asking for you. I set down the tray. Why, West? He doesn't want the hotel translators. He wants someone discreet. The 4th floor was elegant, marble and cream, and the kind of silence that costs money. The 2 security men at the penthouse doors were large in the way that suggested they weren't actually there to open doors. One of them nodded toward the interior. He's in the dining room. The man paused, choosing his words. Direct. I had delivered room service to important people before. I understood how to exist in the presence of power without acknowledging it. But when I entered the penthouse dining room with the tray, something in the air changed. He was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against the city lights of Istanbul burning below. Tall, broad across the shoulders in the way of someone who hadn't earned it at a gym. The suit was charcoal, the kind of expensive that whispers instead of shouts. His hair was dark, graying at the temples in a way that suggested he was old enough to have survived things. He didn't turn around. I set the tray carefully on the side table. The hotel had taught me that silence could be a weapon, and I was not going to hand him one. His reflection watched me in the glass of the window. Blue-gray eyes that looked like winter. You speak Russian. His accent was heavy, each syllable precisely placed like a man arranging chess pieces. Yes, I said. In English first. Then I switched. Who do you want? He turned. The movement was unhurried, but it felt like something heavy rotating in my chest. What is your name? Zara. Turkish. Mother is Turkish. Father was Russian. The lie came easily. I'd used it 100 times. My father had actually been Georgian. But Russians didn't ask follow-up questions about fathers. He approached the table, and I fought the instinct to step back. This was a man who understood that retreat was surrender. So I held my ground, my hands folded, my face carefully neutral. You're the only staff member here who understands me. It wasn't a question. The hotel has professional translators. I don't want translators. His eyes moved across my face like he was reading something written there. I want someone who cannot tell anyone what she hears. And that was when the first shot came through the window. The sound was impossible, a sharp crack that belonged to a completely different world, one that didn't include 5-star hotels and carefully folded napkins. The floor-to-ceiling glass exploded inward in a crystalline shower, and instinct did what training couldn't. I moved, but not toward the door. I moved toward him, my body obeying something older than thought. He caught me, his arm around my waist, pulling me backward, behind the marble pillar that separated the dining room from the lounge. Another shot. The sound was duller this time, hitting something interior. Down. His voice was a growl in Russian, pitched low, more gunfire. The penthouse descended into organized chaos. I could hear shouting from the corridor, running feet, the sounds of security responding. But the firing didn't stop. It was coming from outside, from another building, from a sniper who had a clean line to this room. He was shielding me with his body, his large frame pressing me back against the cold marble. I could feel his heartbeat, steady and controlled, and the absolute absence of fear in him. His hand was on my head, pressing it downward, protecting the soft part of my skull the way a man protects something irreplaceable. How many shooters? I whispered in Russian. He pulled back just enough to look at me. You know, weapons. My father was military. Georgian artillery unit before he came to Turkey. Something flickered across his face, a recalibration. The way a man looks at a pawn that moves like a queen. Listen to me, he said, still in Russian. His voice was low enough that only I could hear it beneath the chaos. When I tell you to move, you go left. Through that door. There are men waiting in the corridor who work for me. You tell them Alexei sent you. You say nothing else. Do you understand? I nodded. Your name? Zara. Zara, he said it like he was memorizing it. I'm Alexei. If you survive the next 5 minutes, we're going to have a serious conversation. The gunfire stopped. Not a pause, a complete cessation, like someone had simply decided the performance was finished. In the ringing silence that followed, Alexei released me and stood, his movements economical and composed. A man appeared in the doorway, dark-haired, younger, with the careful stance of someone who'd trained for moments exactly like this. "The sniper is neutralized," the man said in Russian. "Building 7, floor 12. 2 shooters, both handled. The police are being managed." Alexei nodded once. Then he looked back at me, and I saw something in his expression that would haunt me for months to come. It was the look of a man who just had his world complicated by someone he'd met 90 seconds ago. "Go," he said to me. "The corridor, blue door. Ivan will take you down." I should have run. Any sensible woman would have. Instead, I did something that changed everything I spoke. "Who were they?" I asked in Russian. He smiled. It was the most dangerous thing he'd done all evening, more dangerous than the men with guns, more dangerous than the gun itself. It was a smile that said he'd just decided something about me, and that decision was already binding. "Competitors," he said. "But they're no longer a concern. Go, Zara, before I change my mind about letting you leave." The police never came to my apartment. The hotel management never questioned me. It was as though the entire incident had been absorbed into the night like smoke, leaving no residue, no investigation, no trace that anything had happened at all. That's when I understood who Alexei Volkovich really was. I found this out through the careful filtering of Istanbul's underworld gossip, words whispered between hotel staff, rumors that moved through the city like underground rivers. There was a Russian, a family operation, an infrastructure so deep and so thorough that even the government had learned to work around it instead of against it. For 3 days, I thought it was finished. I did my shifts. I avoided the executive floors. I tried to convince myself that what had happened was anomalous, a spike in my ordinary life that would settle back to normalcy. On the 4th night, my supervisor appeared again. "The penthouse guest is requesting you." My stomach did something complicated. "For what?" He didn't specify. He just said your name and asked for the waitress who speaks Russian. I should have refused. I knew the shape of danger by then. I could feel it in the room before the shooting, could smell it on his skin when he pulled me behind the pillar. But I was 28 years old and very, very lonely. And there was something in the way he'd said my name that suggested loneliness might be something he understood. The penthouse had been repaired. The broken windows were now unmarked glass, the furniture replaced. It looked as though violence had never touched it, which somehow made it more unsettling. He was in the study this time, behind a mahogany desk that looked like it had survived wars. He was reading something on a tablet, and he didn't look up when I entered. "Close the door," he said in Russian. I did. Only then did he set down the tablet and regard me fully. He was wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and I caught sight of a scar that ran from his wrist toward his elbow. It looked old. It looked like it had a story. "Sit," he said. "I'm working. Sit, Zara." There was no cruelty in it, but there was no flexibility either. This was a man used to compliance. I sat in the leather chair across from the desk, my hands in my lap, feeling like someone very small in a very large room. "What is your real name?" he asked. "That is my real name? Your real father? What was his military unit?" He'd caught me in the lie. I felt my face flush, but I didn't look away. "Georgian, the 5th Independent Brigade. He died when I was 14. In combat. Drunk. He fell from a balcony in Batumi." Alexei absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, completely, without judgment, filing it somewhere in that controlled mind. "Your mother. She's still in Turkey." "How do you know my mother is anywhere?" "Because you're still in Turkey. That's the only reason someone this intelligent hasn't left yet." He leaned back in his chair, and the leather creaked under his weight. "You speak Russian, Turkish, and I suspect English. You move without drawing attention. You understand danger when you see it. These are not skills that belong in a hotel. I'm saving money. For what? A visa to somewhere you don't know, a life you haven't planned." He smiled that dangerous smile again. "You're exceptional, Zara, and you're wasting it on the ground floor of a hotel where men like me will notice you and men like those shooters will use you as leverage." My throat felt tight. "Why am I here? Because I need someone." He stood and walked to the window, his silhouette framed against the city again. "Not a translator. Not a spy. Someone who understands that the world I move in requires discretion, compartmentalization, and a very specific kind of intelligence." "You're asking me to. I'm asking you to understand that staying in that hotel is no longer safe." The men who tried to kill me now know you're someone I value. They'll move against you, not because they hate you, but because they want to hurt me. That's how this works." He turned, and his expression was serious now, stripped of that dangerous magnetism. "I'm offering you a choice. Leave Istanbul, go to London, Moscow, anywhere. I'll provide the visa, the money, everything you need. You'll never hear from me again. Or," he paused, "come to work for me, directly. In a position that pays more than you make in a year. Where you'll have security, protection, and the knowledge that you're working for someone who can actually keep you alive." What would I do? Listen, translate. Advise me on cultural contexts I don't understand. Be present in rooms where your presence would seem innocuous to people watching. He approached the chair slowly, and I felt the gravitational pull of him. Be someone I can trust. How would you know if you could trust me? I wouldn't. Not yet. But you already made your choice when you moved toward me instead of away from me during the gunfire. That's not the instinct of someone who runs from danger, Zara. That's the instinct of someone who runs toward something. He was standing very close now, and I could smell him. Expensive cologne over something else. Something that reminded me of winter and old buildings and the kind of safety that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. I can't. I started. You can. You just have to decide if you want to. He extended his hand. Stay at the hotel for tonight. Think about it. If you want the visa and the money, be here at dawn. If not, forget you ever met me. I'll make sure Istanbul forgets about you too. I didn't take his hand. If I come, what happens? Then, he said softly, you become someone very different than you are now. And I become someone responsible for keeping you alive in a world where your presence will complicate everything I've built. He dropped his hand. The door is that way, Zara. Choose now. But I didn't. I stood there in that study while the city burned below us, and I understood that something in me had already chosen before I walked through those doors. Some part of me that had been waiting for years, invisible, patient, for someone to see that I was more than a waitress, more than a daughter, more than a woman with too many languages and nowhere to use them. I'll think about it, I whispered. He nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. I came back to the penthouse at 50:47 in the morning. 4 minutes before dawn, Alexei was waiting, dressed in a charcoal suit, with coffee prepared on the side table. The gesture was small, but it was the first kind thing anyone had offered me in years without expecting something in return. Or so I thought. You came, he said, and there was something in his voice that suggested surprise was not an emotion he experienced often. I came to listen to the rest of your offer, I said carefully. He smiled. Sit, drink the coffee. I did both, and the coffee was exceptional, strong and dark and shot through with cardamom, like something from my childhood. Like he'd somehow known. Tomorrow you'll resign from the hotel, he said. You'll tell them you're moving to Europe. They'll accept this because people like me ensure that they ask very few questions. Your apartment will be cleaned out, your things packed. By afternoon you'll be in a new apartment that I've prepared. It's in Besiktas, high floor, private entrance. You'll have security, though you won't always see them. You've already prepared an apartment. I made preparations when you left the penthouse last night. I've learned that hesitation is usually just uncertainty waiting for clarification. He poured himself coffee. You'll start tomorrow night. There's a dinner I'm hosting, political figures, some business interests, 3 families of importance. You'll be present as my associate, someone I consult with. You'll listen, translate private conversations if needed, and tell me afterward what you observed in terms of body language, hesitation, confidence. Essentially, you want me to spy on your guests. I want you to observe what my guests don't think I can see. That's different. He sipped his coffee. The money is substantial. I'm sure they've explained the amounts in whatever preliminary conversation happened. They hadn't. I realized now that I hadn't asked, and he'd known I wouldn't. Will I be safe? I asked quietly. No. He set down his cup. His expression was serious, without the charm that usually softened his intensity. You'll be safer with me than you would be alone, but you won't be safe. Not entirely. That world doesn't offer safety to anyone, especially not to people who matter to the man running it. But you'll be protected, there's a difference. I don't understand. Safe is passive, it means nothing touches you. Protected is active. It means I break things that try to touch you. He leaned forward, and the sincerity in his eyes was more intimate than any touch could have been. You'll be protected, Zara, every single day. I'll see to it personally. That should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a feeling I had no name for, Something between gratitude and dread, and a kind of hunger I didn't want to examine too closely. What about after? If I do this for a year, what happens then? Then you decide, he said simply. But I don't think you'll want to leave. He was arrogant about it, casually certain, and I hated that he was probably right. The dinner was held at a mansion in Iap, built into the hillside like it had grown there rather than been constructed. The architecture was Ottoman, refurbished into something sleek and modern, and the guest list was a who's who of Istanbul's power structure, some legitimate, some decidedly less so. Alexei moved through the rooms like he owned them, because he probably did. He was comfortable in a way that suggested comfort was something that happened around him rather than something he pursued. When he introduced me, it was as Zara, someone I trust with significant matters. That designation did something to the way people looked at me. It transformed me from waitress to something less defined, more dangerous. I wore black. Alexei had arranged for a stylist to prepare me, and the woman had dressed me like a painting, elegant, understated, impossible to ignore if you looked directly at her, but easy to forget if you didn't. It was a specific kind of invisibility that required being very beautiful. Halfway through the evening, a Russian businessman cornered Alexei to discuss a shipment that was delayed due to port complications. I watched Alexei's face as the man spoke, and I understood what he'd hired me to do. He wanted to know if his own people were lying to him. When we left the party near midnight, he asked quietly, "What did you see?" "The man was afraid," I said. "Not of you. Of whoever gave him the information about the shipment. He was passing on a message from someone else, and he was terrified of what would happen if you blamed him for the delay." Alexei's hand found the small of my back as we descended the marble staircase. It was a gesture that looked protective from the outside. From the inside, it felt like claiming. "Good," he said softly. "The delay is my own operation. I wanted to know if my second in command was being truthful or conspiring." He was truthful. "What will you do?" "I'll find who frightened him and remind them that the only fear worth having in this city is fear of me." He said it factly, without pride or cruelty. It was simply the architecture of his world. In the car, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, he sat beside me in the back seat while a driver and security man occupied the front. He didn't touch me, but he was close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, close enough that the air between us felt charged and careful. "You're good at this," he said. "Ate what?" "Understanding people without letting them understand you. It's a rare quality." He looked at me sideways. "You've spent a long time being invisible, haven't you?" It was too perceptive. It made me uncomfortable. "Yes," I said anyway. "That ends now. You're not invisible to me. You'll need to decide if that's a comfort or a threat." He reached over and took my hand. It was the first time he'd touched me since the night of the shooting, and the sensation was like touching a live wire. His hand was large and warm and covered in small scars that suggested a life lived outside of safety. "I'm going to hurt you," he said quietly. "Not intentionally, but this world will hurt you, and I'm part of this world. I want you to know that up front." "I know," I whispered. "Do you?" He turned my hand over, examining my palm like he might find answers there. "Or are you just desperate enough to say yes to anything?" I should have pulled my hand away. I should have lied and said I understood. Instead, I told him the truth. "I'm desperate enough to say yes to you. I don't know if that's the same thing." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he brought my hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to my palm, and the gesture was so tender, so careful, that it broke something in my chest. "From this moment forward," he said against my skin, "you belong to me, not because I demand it, because you chose it." And I realized that I had. 3 weeks into my employment, I understood that the apartment in Besiktas was actually a gilded cage. Not because Alexei had installed locks on the doors. He hadn't. The cage was more subtle than that. It was constructed from routine, from the knowledge that leaving would damage him, from the reality that people were now watching me to understand him. My days followed a pattern. Morning coffee with Alexei in whatever property he occupied that night. Mid-morning meetings where I would attend and listen and observe. Afternoons alone in the apartment, reading books he'd selected for me or translating documents he deemed important for me to understand about his operation. Evenings at dinners, charity galas. Private meetings where my presence somehow smoothed the tensions and loosened the tongues of men who assumed I couldn't possibly understand the weight of what they were saying. I understood everything. I became proficient at the politics of his world, the family structures, the territories, the unspoken agreements that held Istanbul's underworld in balance. I learned that the shooting at the hotel had been a message from a Russian outfit operating out of Bulgaria, and that Alexei's response had been surgical and complete enough that they no longer existed as a coherent organization. I learned that he was feared by powerful men. And I learned that he was watching me with an intensity that suggested he was counting down toward something. It happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks and 4 days into my new life. We were in the penthouse again. It had become his primary residence, perhaps because that's where he'd first seen me move toward him instead of away. Alexei was working at the desk, reviewing documents that made his jaw tighten, while I sat by the window reading one of the books he'd given me. The evening light was turning the city gold, and for a moment, I forgot that I was a prisoner masquerading as an employee. Then his phone rang. The call lasted perhaps 90 seconds. Alexei spoke in Russian, his voice dropping into registers I'd never heard before, and when he finished, something fundamental had shifted. He set down the phone very carefully, as if it might deaden it. "There's been a complication," he said. "What kind?" "A woman in Moscow has claimed that she's carrying my child from a relationship 5 years ago." He said it without inflection, but his hands had curled into fists. "She's demanding money or she goes to the press. She's also, and this is the part that interests me, claiming to have evidence of involvement in activities that would interest several government agencies." I understood immediately what this meant. Blackmail. Leverage. He corrected. "She's holding a life over my head, my hypothetical life. And she's smart enough to know that I can't kill her to solve this, because killing her would confirm everything she's threatening to expose." "What will you do?" "I'm going to go to Moscow," he said quietly. "For approximately 1 week. I'm going to meet with this woman and understand what she actually wants versus what she's claiming to want, and then I'm going to solve the problem." I felt something crack open in my chest. "And me, you stay here." In the apartment, with security tripled. He looked at me fully for the first time since the phone call. "You don't leave. You don't contact anyone. You don't even go on the balcony without clearing it with the security team first. Do you understand? Why? If you're in Moscow? Because now they know you matter to me. Your existence as a leverage point has value to anyone who wants to hurt me. That makes you a target." He stood and approached me, and I could see the control it took him to move slowly, to keep his hands loose, to not let the predator beneath the suit completely emerge. He knelt in front of my chair, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky over a frozen lake. "I need you to trust me," he said. "I need you to stay in that apartment and know that I'm aware of every threat. I need you to understand that this is what it means to be close to me. You don't get the benefits of my protection without the cage that comes with it." "How long?" I whispered. "As long as it takes. And if you don't come back," something flickered across his face. "I will. I've survived worse odds than this, and I've never had a reason to come back before. Now I do." He took my face in his hands, and his touch was unexpectedly gentle. "Look at me, Zara. Tell me you understand what I'm saying. You're saying you'll die for me." I didn't mean to say it. The words just emerged, raw and certain. "I'm saying I'll move heaven and earth before I let it come to that." His forehead touched mine. "But yes, if it came to it, I would. And that's something you need to understand about this. This isn't a job. This isn't a transaction. This is you, inside my chest, behind my ribs, in a place I didn't know existed until you walked into that dining room 3 weeks ago." He kissed me then, on the forehead, on each cheekbone, and finally on my mouth. It was not the kiss of seduction. It was the kiss of a man who was about to leave, and needed to memorize the taste of the only thing in his world worth protecting. When he left the next morning for Moscow, I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too busy being terrified that the confidence he'd expressed was misplaced, that he was actually walking into a trap designed specifically to exploit his one weakness. Me. Confinement should have driven me insane. Instead, it clarified everything. I spent the days reading the books he'd left, absorbing the blueprints of his empire through the careful documentation he'd arranged. I learned the names of his lieutenants, the structure of his operations, the financial mechanisms that allowed him to move money through Istanbul, like a man navigating his own home. I also learned to understand him. The books weren't random. They were carefully selected, Dostoevsky for the philosophy of crime and punishment, Tolstoy for the understanding of power and obsession, contemporary memoirs of former FSB operatives, historical texts on Russian organized crime. He was teaching me to think like he did, To understand the world not as it appeared but as the complex system of power and consequence that ran beneath the surface. The security team knew not to speak to me unnecessarily. I had food delivered daily, always prepared by someone Alexei trusted, always varying enough that I wouldn't feel the monotony. I had access to the apartment, its books, its expensive furniture, the view of Istanbul that looked like a promise. I had everything except freedom. On day 4, my phone, one that Alexei had provided, rang. It was him. "Are you safe?" he asked without preamble. "Yes." "Are you angry?" I considered the question. "I should be. But you're not." "No, I'm trying to understand why you think I'm worth all of this." A pause. "Then, do you read the books I left?" "Every word." "Tell me what you learned." So I did. I told him how Dostoevsky wrote about the rationalization of crime, how men convinced themselves that breaking rules was acceptable if the outcome served a higher purpose. I told him how Tolstoy understood that absolute power didn't corrupt so much as clarify. It showed you exactly what you wanted and removed the filters that kept you from taking it. "You wanted me?" I said quietly, "before you even knew me. And you took me 'cause you could." "Less," he said, and the honesty of it was both terrible and beautiful. But wanting and taking are different from keeping. Keeping requires a choice. I could hold you prisoner in that apartment and own you through force. But you would hate me, and that would make you useless to me, which would make you worthless. So instead, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. What? Do you hate me? My breath caught. No. Do you resent your confinement? Yes. But not because I want to leave. Why then? Because confinement means you don't trust me. And I need you to trust me the way I'm learning to trust you. He was quiet for a long moment. By the time I'm back in Istanbul, you won't be locked in that apartment. You'll be free to move, with security that's less obvious but equally complete. You'll be able to go out, to see people, to build a life that's yours. But you won't leave the city. And you won't run. Do you know why? Because you'll find me. Because you won't want to be found. He came back on the evening of day 8. I didn't hear him enter. The security was too practiced for that, but I felt him the way you feel a shift in air pressure. He was standing in the doorway of the study, and he looked like he'd been broken and poorly reassembled. There was a bandage on his left side visible where his shirt had shifted. His knuckles were split. His eyes carried the weight of whatever had happened in Moscow. I stood without permission, without hesitation. "Come here," he said, and I did. He pulled me into his chest carefully, as if I might be the thing that broke in the next moment. I could feel the bandage through my shirt, could feel the slight hiss of pain as he held me against his wounded side. "It's handled," I asked. "It's handled." His hand was in my hair, his face pressed to my head. She was pregnant, with a child that's definitely mine. The pregnancy was real. The evidence was real, but the threat was inflated. She wanted money and legitimacy for the child. What did you give her? Money. Education arrangements for the child. A quiet life somewhere safe. His voice was rough. My blood. I confirmed it the moment she showed the infant to me. "It's my daughter Zara. I have a daughter in Moscow, and I didn't know it until 4 days ago." I absorbed this carefully, understanding what it meant. He had a tie to another woman, a permanent connection. A child that would always be his first obligation. "Do you love the mother?" I asked. No. His hand tightened in my hair. I never did. It was 5 years ago. I was a different person. But I love the daughter. The moment I saw her, something in me recognized her as mine, and I would burn down countries to keep her alive. "Then that's what matters," I said simply. "That you'll burn down countries for her. And for me, that you'll do whatever it takes." He pulled back enough to look at me, and there were tears in his eyes. Actual tears. I had never thought a man like Alexei could cry. "I'm terrified," he said, and the confession was like watching an armor crack. "I have a daughter I can't protect the way she deserves. I have you, and I'm capable of destroying your entire life if I'm not careful. I'm terrified that one day you'll realize what it costs to be close to me and you'll run, and I'll have to choose between letting you go and becoming a monster to keep you." "You're already a monster," I said. "You're the kind of man who orders violence without hesitation. But you held me behind a pillar during gunfire and asked if I was safe before anything else. That's not a monster. That's a man trying to be better than his own nature." He kissed me then, and this time it was different. It was not gentle. It was desperate and hungry and full of the kind of need that doesn't apologize for itself. I didn't pull away. I moved toward him, my hands finding the unbandaged parts of his back, needing to feel him beneath my palms, needing to confirm that he'd made it back to me. But when his hands moved toward the buttons of my dress, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want him, but because I was afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of how it would change me, afraid of becoming so completely his that I lost the edges of myself. He felt the hesitation and stopped, pulling back to look at me. Not yet, he said quietly. I'm sorry, don't be. He kissed my forehead. There's nothing I want that you're not ready to give. We have time, but we didn't, of course. We just didn't know it yet. The confession came a week later, during a moment when everything was quiet. We'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost domestic. He would work during the morning, and I would sit in the study with him, reading or listening to him conduct business in languages he knew I understood. We'd have lunch together. In the afternoons, he'd take me through the apartment and explain the architectural choices, the security measures, the kind of thought that went into maintaining sanctuary in a world that was constantly trying to penetrate it. He was teaching me the philosophy of his home, which was teaching me the philosophy of him. In the evenings, we'd sit on the balcony overlooking the city, and he would talk about Moscow. About the daughter he was learning to protect from a distance, about the compromises it had forced him to make. He was integrating me into his life one conversation at a time, and I was allowing myself to be integrated. It was the night of the 8th week when the text came. His phone lit up with a message from his lieutenant, Ivan, and whatever it said made Alexei's entire body go rigid. He stood from the chair where we were reading, and I watched as the controlled man I'd come to know peeled back to reveal something older, something that looked like rage. What is it? I asked. A rival family has moved against me, not directly. They've arrested one of my people on trafficking charges. It's a frame, but it's sophisticated, evidence planted, witnesses arranged, a narrative so carefully constructed that my lawyers will have a hard time breaking it apart in court. What will you do? What I always do. He turned to me, and his eyes were black now, all the winter, blue replaced with something that looked like a predator waking up. I'll respond in kind. Except I won't frame anyone. I'll make sure every piece of evidence is real. Every witness is genuine, and the man responsible for this move will end up imprisoned for crimes he actually committed. I asked, though I thought I knew, Dmitry Sokolov, he runs the family out of Besiktas. He's smart, he's ruthless, and he's decided that I'm vulnerable enough to move against. Alexei's hands clenched into fists. He looked at my weakness and thought he could exploit it. Understanding crashed over me. I'm the weakness. He didn't deny it. That was when I understood the full scope of what he'd brought into his world, and what he'd brought me into. Get him out. I said quietly. The man who was arrested. Get him out before Sokolov understands how to use this. The arrest is too public. Any move I make will confirm that, then confirm it. I stood, moving toward him. Confirm that you'll burn the city down to protect your people. Confirm that there's no cost too high for loyalty. Let Dmitry see that the weakness he thought he found is actually your greatest strength, because you're willing to sacrifice anything for it. Alexei stared at me. You're suggesting I go to war. I'm suggesting you win before he's ready for the fight to start. I felt something crystallize inside me, some part of me that had been waiting for this moment. Your people follow you because they believe you'll protect them. Prove it. Publicly. Completely. And in doing that, you tell every family in Istanbul that moving against you is suicide. He reached out and pulled me into his chest, and his hands were shaking. Do you understand what you just told me to do? He asked against my hair. Yes. You're going to have people killed or imprisoned or ruined. And then you're going to consolidate power, and Istanbul is going to be even more completely yours than it already was. And that doesn't frighten you. It terrifies me, I admitted. But less than the idea of you losing everything because I'm a liability. He pulled back and kissed me, and there was something desperate in it, something that tasted like goodbye. Then he was moving, picking up his phone, making calls in rapid Russian that set the city in motion. By dawn, the operation was complete. Sokolov's evidence was traced back to the family he paid for false testimony. His own transportation company, legitimate on the surface, but the surface was all it took, was found to have been moving trafficked persons. The witnesses who testified against Alexei's man suddenly recanted, and when they were pressed on why, they told stories about intimidation that implicated Sokolov. By the time the sun set that second day, Dmitry Sokolov was in custody, and Alexei was walking into a meeting with the families that controlled Istanbul to discuss new territorial arrangements. I didn't see him for those 3 days. The apartment was guarded, peaceful, utterly isolated, while the man I'd learned to trust was reshaping the city's power structure. When he came back, he was dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the fact that he was running on exhaustion and adrenaline. His eyes looked like they belonged to a man who'd seen the borders of his own capacity and decided they were no longer sufficient. "It's done," he said simply. "Sokolov will be imprisoned for at least 20 years. My man is released. The families understand that moving against me has a cost measured in destruction." "At what expense?" I asked. 3 of Sokolov's associates died. It was necessary. They were the ones moving the actual trafficking. The women they were moving are now in the hands of people who will help them. He removed his jacket carefully, and I could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. I also had to make certain arrangements with the families. Power consolidation requires acknowledgement, agreements, recognition of new hierarchies. "What kind of arrangements?" He was quiet for a moment. I gave them security assurances, investments, territory adjustments, but most importantly, I gave them a show of absolute power. And absolute power requires a kind of ruthlessness that I had to demonstrate was part of my nature. "People died because of me," I said, and the realization felt like drowning. "People died because Sokolov is a predator and his time had come." He approached me carefully. "But yes, your presence in my life was the precipitant. I would have moved against him eventually, but it would have been slower, more calculated. Instead, I did it quickly, decisively, and it cost lives that might have been saved if you didn't matter to me. So I should leave." The words hurt to say. "You should understand what staying means." He took my face in his hands, and his thumbs brushed tears I didn't realize I'd shed. "You're not a weakness anymore, Zara. You're the reason I'm willing to escalate conflicts before they escalate against me. You're the reason I'm building a version of myself that's stronger, faster, more ruthless. And yes, that costs. But it also means that no one will ever be able to touch you, because everyone in this city now understands that touching you is equivalent to touching the heart of a man who will respond with complete annihilation. That's not protection," I whispered. "That's ownership. It's both." He pulled me against him. "I own you because you let me. Because you walked into that apartment and told me to win, knowing it would cost blood. Because some part of you understands that being close to me means becoming part of the machine, and you accepted that. You didn't run. You didn't beg me to choose safety over power. You told me to be the monster I'm capable of being." I wanted to protest, to claim I hadn't understood the scope of what I was asking, but I had. Some part of me had always known. "I love you," I said, and it felt like admitting to a crime. "I know." He held me tighter. "I love you too. And that's the most dangerous thing that's happened in this city in 20 years. It happened on the night everything shifted from controlled tension to inevitable momentum. We were alone in the penthouse, and Alexei was reading something on his tablet while I sat in the adjacent chair, my body aware of his with a sensitivity that made every moment feel like we were touching even when we weren't. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Sokolov, 3 months of proximity and restraint and a hunger that he'd made no move to satisfy. I understood, finally, what he'd been doing. He was teaching me the difference between desire and need, between wanting him and needing the protection he offered. He was making sure that when it happened, and we both knew it would, there would be no question that it was my choice, made from a position of full knowledge rather than seduction. He was giving me the dignity of understanding exactly what I was choosing. "Come here," he said, not looking up from the tablet. I moved from my chair to his, and he pulled me into his lap carefully, as if I were something precious. It was dark outside the windows, the city lights creating a constellation below us, and his hand settled on the small of my back. "I received word today that Dmitri is being released," he said quietly. I pulled back to look at him. "That's not possible. The evidence is solid, but money is more solid." He brushed a strand of hair from my face. "A judge was paid an obscene amount to find reasonable doubt. He'll be free within the week. What will you do?" "I'll handle it." His hand moved to my cheek. "But before I do, I need you to understand something. Everything I've done since you spoke to me in that study, all of it was for this moment, to ensure you understood exactly what you were choosing when you chose me. I chose you months ago," I whispered. "No," he said. "You chose the idea of me. You chose the version of myself that I presented. I needed you to choose the man who's killed, who's stolen, who's imprisoned people and destroyed families. I needed you to look at that man and still choose him." His hand moved to the neckline of my dress, and I felt my breath catch. Is this the moment? I asked, and my voice sounded small even to myself. This is the moment, he confirmed. But only if you tell me yes. Not because I'm asking. Because you're choosing. I couldn't form the word. Instead, I nodded, and he understood. He stood holding me against his chest and carried me through the penthouse to the bedroom. The space was large and dark, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He set me on the bed carefully, and I watched as he removed his shirt, revealing the lean muscular architecture of his chest and the scars that mapped a lifetime of violence. You're sure? He asked one last time. I reached out and touched the largest scar, the one that ran from his collarbone toward his heart, and I didn't answer with words. I pulled him down toward me, and when his mouth found mine, I felt something inside me surrender completely. His kiss was not gentle, but it was careful. He controlled the pace, controlled the depth, controlling everything but the intensity of his need. His hands moved to the zip of my dress, and he pulled it down slowly, and I understood that he was giving me every moment to object, to change my mind, to say no. I didn't say no. The dress fell away, and his hands on my bare skin felt like they were burning me alive from the inside. My breath came in shudders, and I couldn't seem to coordinate my limbs properly. There was no confidence in my movements, only hesitation and confusion, and a kind of surrender that felt like falling. Breathe, he whispered against my neck. I have you. I did, and the simple act of breathing centered me. His hands continued their exploration, and I realized he was studying me the way he studied everything else, with complete attention, learning the geography of my body, understanding where I was sensitive, where I trembled, where my breath caught. When he positioned himself above me, he looked into my eyes, and there was no dominance in his expression anymore. There was only vulnerability and need, and the kind of fear that comes from wanting something so badly that losing it would break you. I'm going to take care of you, he said. And then he was inside me, and it hurt and it felt good, and it felt like a kind of completion I hadn't known was possible. I gasped, and my hands found purchase on his shoulders, and he held me through the shock of the sensation. I've got you, he whispered. I've got you, Zara. He moved with exquisite control, not rushing, letting me adjust to him. And I realized that this was also teaching. He was showing me that my pleasure mattered, that my comfort was important even when he wanted me, with a desperation that was visible in every tense muscle. I started to move with him, tentative at first, and then with more certainty. The pleasure built slowly, steadily, and when it crested, it was not violent or overwhelming. It was like coming home, like finally understanding what all the waiting had been for. Afterward, we lay in the darkness, and he held me against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. I could feel his hand in my hair, stroking slowly, and I understood that this was what he'd been waiting for. This moment of absolute vulnerability where I was entirely his and he was entirely mine. I love you, I said into the darkness. I know, he answered. I love you too. For the first time since this began, the words felt complete. Dimitri's release came with complications. We were at a restaurant in Galata when the first threats arrived. 3 messages to Alexi's phone, each one progressively more specific about what Dimitri intended. By the time we finished our meal, security had tripled, and Alexei was receiving reports that Dimitri had been seen in different parts of the city, positioning people, building towards something. He's going to make a move. Ivan told Alexei in Russian, assuming I didn't understand. I'd learned to let them assume that. When? Alexei asked. Within the week. He's running out of time. He knows that if he doesn't establish dominance quickly, the families will stop respecting him. I watched Alexei process this, saw the calculations moving behind his eyes, the scenarios he was running through that vast tactical mind. When we left the restaurant, the security detail had become a small army, and I realized that the careful world he'd built was about to shatter. It shattered on a Wednesday. I was in the apartment when the attack came. Not on Alexei, on me. 3 men, well, trained, very professional, moving through the building with the kind of coordination that suggested planning. But Alexei had anticipated this. He'd anticipated everything. The security system engaged automatically. Locks sealed, exits became impassable, and Alexei, who'd been in a meeting in the study, moved from civilized businessman to something else, entirely in the space of a heartbeat. He pulled me away from the window and toward the safe room that I'd never been inside. Stay here, he said. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Alexei. But he was already moving, already becoming the violence that the city feared. I heard shots. heard crashes, heard the sounds of men fighting. I wanted to be anywhere but locked in that room listening to the man I loved defend against the consequence of being with me. The sound stopped after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then there was silence. I unlocked the door and emerged into a penthouse that looked like a war had been fought in it. There was blood on the marble. One of the attackers was unconscious in the hallway. But Alexei was standing at the window, breathing heavily, his knuckles split and bleeding, his shirt torn and soaked in blood that might not have all been his own. "Are you hurt?" I asked, rushing toward him. Not significantly. He didn't look at me. He was staring out at the city, and his body was shaking with the residual adrenaline. The other two got away. Ivan is tracking them. "Ooh," I demanded. "Who did this? Dmitri?" This was a message. He couldn't kill me, but he could get to you. He wanted me to understand that having you makes me vulnerable, and he intended to exploit that. I understood the weight of what he wasn't saying. "You should send me away." "No," he said, and the word was absolute. "Alexei, if I'm making you vulnerable." He turned to me, and his eyes were the coldest I'd ever seen them. "You think this is the first time someone has tried to use me through people I care about? You think I didn't anticipate this? I've been preparing for this moment since I saw you in that dining room. I've built protections around you that Dmitri couldn't penetrate in his wildest dreams. 3 men got into this building. 4 men actually got in," he corrected. "One of them is in a coma in the basement. One of them is currently being handled by people who are asking him very specific questions. The other 2 are being tracked as we speak. And when they're found, Dmitri will understand that the cost of moving against me through you is the complete annihilation of his organization." He cupped my face in his hands, and I could feel the tremor in them. "Do you understand what you are to me? You're not a weakness. You're the justification. You're the reason I get to become the full version of myself without hesitation or mercy." "That's not love," I whispered. "That's obsession." "It's both," he said. "Love and obsession are the same thing when you're a man like me. You can't separate them." He kissed me then, with a desperation that tasted like blood and fury, and a kind of possession that acknowledged no boundary. When he pulled back, there was an intensity in his eyes that was terrifying and beautiful and completely inevitable. "I'm going to end this," he said quietly. "Not Dmitri. Dmitri's already finished. He just doesn't know it yet. But I'm going to end the threat. All of it. Every family that's even considered moving against me. I'm going to consolidate power so completely that the only reason anyone in this city breathes is because I permit it." "At what cost?" I asked. "Whatever it takes." It took 72 hours. Dmitri was arrested again, but this time the evidence wasn't planted. He'd been caught on camera orchestrating the attack. His lieutenant had been convinced to turn state's evidence in exchange for witness protection. 3 other members of his organization were dead, killed not by Alexei's hands, but by the weight of the law once properly motivated. By the time it was done, Dmitri was looking at life in prison with no possibility of parole, and his entire organization had collapsed. What replaced it was a power structure, so completely dominated by Alexei that the other families had no choice but to accept his supremacy or find themselves destroyed. It was elegant in its brutality. It was art, and I had caused it. The realization came to me on the 3rd night, as Alexei slept beside me. His body finally relaxed after 72 hours of sustained intensity. I lay in the darkness and understood the full scope of what I'd done by choosing him. I hadn't just chosen a man. I'd chosen the violence he perpetuated, the lives he destroyed, the families he ruined. I'd chosen to be the kind of woman who could watch these things happen and feel not horror, but a strange kind of twisted pride that he was willing to go to such lengths for me. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, and the most terrifying part was that I didn't want to stop. The meeting with the families happened in a neutral space, a restaurant in the European side that served Ottoman cuisine and Russian vodka in equal measure. Alexei brought me with him, and I understood that this was deliberate. He was displaying me, claiming me publicly, making sure every family understood that I was no longer a liability but a symbol of his complete integration of his personal desires with his professional authority, a symbol that the man who commanded them was capable of having something to lose and not letting it weaken him. Instead, it made him stronger. The families came, men who'd controlled Istanbul's underworld for decades. Men who'd lost territory, lost face, lost everything when they'd moved against Alexei and lost. But they came anyway, because refusing would be admitting their irrelevance. Alexei held court like a tsar, and I sat beside him in a dress that had probably cost more than my monthly salary at the hotel. I said nothing. I observed. I listened. I understood that this was the last test. These men needed to see if I would weaken him, if my presence would make him merciful or sentimental. He was neither. When the meeting ended, agreements had been restructured. Territory had been adjusted. Power had been formally consolidated, and the families had accepted, with whatever grace they could muster, that Alexei Volkovich was now the absolute authority in Istanbul's underworld, and they served at his pleasure. Afterward, in the car, he was quiet. "You're having regrets," he said. It wasn't a question. "How do you know?" "Because I know you. Because you're starting to understand the full scope of what it costs to love me, and you're wondering if the cost is too high." He was right, I was. How many people have died because of this? Because of me? I asked quietly. Dimitri's organization, 17 confirmed. Another dozen or so that occurred in the collateral violence. The families who lost territory didn't die, but they lost everything, their organizations, their influence, their entire futures. He turned to look at me. So the answer is that approximately 30 people have had their lives fundamentally altered because you chose to stay with me. And you're not sorry. No. The word was absolute. I'm not sorry. These men were predators. They would have preyed on someone whether you existed or not. The only difference is that because you do exist, I motivated myself to move faster. To remove them from circulation permanently instead of allowing them to continue their operations indefinitely. We drove in silence. "You know what the most dangerous part of this is," he continued. "It's that you're starting to believe that narrative. You're starting to tell yourself that maybe those men deserved what happened to them. That maybe your presence in my life wasn't a cause but a catalyst for justice." Did they deserve it? Yes, absolutely. Dimitri was a human trafficker. He sold women into slavery. He deserved imprisonment, and he deserves far worse than he'll receive. But the point is that your presence in my life doesn't absolve me of my choices. It just makes me more willing to make them. He took my hand. "I need you to choose me with your eyes open, Zara. Not because you've convinced yourself that I'm good, or that what I do is justified, but because you can look at what I am and what I've done and choose it anyway. Choose me despite the cost, not because of justification you've constructed." "Why would I do that?" I whispered. "Because you love me." He brought my hand to his mouth and kissed it. Because loving someone means accepting that they're capable of terrible things and loving them, not in spite of that but including it. You can't remove the violence from who I am without removing the part of me that loves you. I thought about this for a long time. I'm terrified. I finally said, "I know. I'm terrified that you'll eventually decide I'm a liability after all. That you'll decide the cost is too high and eliminate the problem. That will never happen." He pulled me into his side. "Not because I'm incapable of it, but because you're the only person in my world who isn't using me. The only person who isn't trying to exploit or manipulate or position themselves for advantage. You're the only genuine thing in my life, and I protect genuine things with a ferocity that borders on insane." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you make a choice. You can leave. Right now, tonight I'll arrange everything. Visa, money, a completely new identity if you want it. You'll be safe and far away from this. Or you stay. You accept that you're bound to me now not because I'm keeping you, but because you've chosen to be. And you build a life with me in a world that's not safe and never will be, but where you'll be protected and loved with an intensity that most people never experience." I looked at him, really looked at him. At the scars on his hands, at the coldness in his eyes, at the ruthlessness that was as much a part of him as breathing, and I realized I'd already chosen. "I'm staying," I said. He nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "Then we get married," he said. "Not immediately, but soon. I want to make you legitimate, not in the legal sense, but in the understanding of everyone in this city. I want them to know that you're not a possession or a weakness but a partner. My partner. Is this a proposal? This is a declaration. A proposal would be something different, something that assumes you might say no." He kissed my forehead. "I don't operate under that assumption." But he did propose, 3 days later. With a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and a moment of such tenderness that I understood, finally the difference between the violence he was capable of, and the gentleness he'd learned to show me. The wedding was held 6 months later in the penthouse, in front of the families of Istanbul's underworld, and the careful selection of government and business officials, who'd learned to work around Alexei rather than against him. I wore white, which felt like a joke, but Alexei had insisted. You came into my world innocent, he'd said. I want to marry you as close to that state as possible before you become completely tainted by what I am. I wasn't innocent anymore. I knew that. But I understood what he meant. The ceremony was conducted by a judge who'd been paid enough to make his presence meaningful without making it an official record. This was real, but unregistered, which meant it had all the emotional weight of a legal marriage with none of the legal entanglement that might later complicate things. Dmitri, from his prison cell in Ankara, sent a wedding gift. It was a photograph of his daughter, who was 7 years old, and a note in his careful script. This is what you took from me. I hope you sleep well at night. I wanted to be horrified. Instead, I felt almost nothing. Alexei read it and burned it in front of me. He's trying to make you feel guilt, he said. It's a manipulation. The truth is that he took his own daughter's childhood by making the choices he made. Her life became hard because of him, not because of us. I nodded, and I realized that I believed him. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in a private villa in Capri, where no one could find us and the only voices were the ones we wanted to hear. We made love constantly, and it was sometimes tender and sometimes desperate, but it was always completely honest. It was there, in the quiet of Capri, that Alexei told me about the Moscow daughter. I want you to meet her, he said. She's 6 years old, her name is Katerina. She's being raised by her mother and a nanny, completely separated from my world. But she's my blood, and I want her to know she has a stepmother who cares about her. Will she want to know me? I asked. She'll want to know anything about her father that her mother will allow her to know. He paused. Which is why you can't be what you are to me when you meet her. You can't be the woman who loves violence, who watches men burn and feels satisfaction. You have to be someone good, Zara. Someone whole and kind and uncomplicated. Can I be both? I asked. No. He kissed my shoulder. But you can learn to separate them. Can learn to be the mother figure to her, while still being the partner who understands exactly what I am. I met Katerina 2 weeks after we returned from Capri. She was small and dark, haired and had Alexei's eyes, and when she looked at me, I felt something shift in my chest that I recognized as the beginning of love. A different love from what I felt for Alexei, but no less consuming. She called me Zara, not stepmother or mother or any designation, just Zara. And I became part of her life in the way that a color becomes part of a painting, not essential perhaps, but present and permanent. 3 years passed. I built a life that was both completely normal and deeply criminal. I had a charity organization that helped displaced women, which was genuine work that I cared about deeply. I had a husband who loved me with the intensity that never quite cooled into comfort. I had a stepdaughter who called me at school and told me about her day. I had a home that was beautiful and protected and utterly mine, but I also knew the weight of what Alexei was doing. I knew that the charity work was partially funded by money that originated in activities I tried not to understand too closely. I knew that the displaced women we helped included some who'd been rescued from the very organizations Alexei dominated. I knew that the protection I enjoyed was built on the suffering of people who weren't as fortunate as me, and I lived with it. This was the real cost, I understood. Not the violence itself, but the compromise it required. The way you had to reshape your morality to accommodate loving someone who operated outside of it. The threat came on a Tuesday. From an unexpected source, a woman appeared in Istanbul claiming to have evidence that Alexei had ordered a kill that had resulted in the death of an innocent man, a businessman who'd been mistakenly identified as a rival. She had documents, photographs, testimony. She was planning to go to the International Criminal Court and expose not just Alexei, but the entire structure of Istanbul's organized crime. Her name was Sofia Volkovich, and she was Alexei's half-sister. He learned about it from Ivan, and I watched as something very cold and very dangerous moved through his eyes. She's family, I said. You can't. I can do whatever is necessary. Not to family. I was thinking of Katerina, of what that would cost him, of the man he was trying to be for her. Not to someone who shares your blood. He was quiet for a long moment. She doesn't want money, he said. She wants acknowledgement. She wants me to admit that I killed an innocent man and that I'm willing to live with that. Then admit it, I said simply. He looked at me sharply. Admit that you made a mistake. That an innocent man died because your intelligence was flawed. That you're willing to accept the consequence of that instead of trying to silence her. That would destroy everything. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it would demonstrate that you're capable of being something other than pure power. capable of vulnerability, capable of learning. He was quiet for a very long time. What happened next was not redemption, but it was something. He met with Sophia not with violence or intimidation, but with honesty. He admitted the mistake. He paid compensation to the innocent man's family, not through shadowy channels but through official acknowledgement. He accepted the investigation that followed, confident that his lawyers could navigate the legal system with the same precision that he navigated the criminal one. The case never went to trial because the evidence was circumstantial and old, but the process itself damaged him. It cost him influence with some of the families. It forced him to be publicly aware of the weight of his actions. But it also meant he could look Katerina in the eye and tell her about her father without disguising who he was. 4 years after our wedding, on a night when Alexei was reviewing documents from another investigation, he said something that changed everything. "I think I want to retire." I set down my book. "What?" "Not immediately, but eventually, when Katerina's older, when there's someone ready to take over the organization. I want to have a life that isn't this." "What would you do?" I asked. "I don't know. That's the frightening part. I don't know how to be a person outside of this world." "You could learn," I said. "Maybe." He reached over and took my hand. "But I know I don't want to be in this world without you in it. And I know I don't want Katerina to think that this is the only way to live. I want her to have options." "She will," I said. "Because you'll give them to her." He pulled me into his chest, and we sat in silence in that penthouse overlooking the city that was his empire and my prison and our shared kingdom. I thought about the night of the shooting, about the moment he'd pulled me behind the pillar, about the choice I'd made to move toward him instead of away. I thought about every person who'd suffered because of that choice, and about the ones I'd helped because of the position it gave me. There was no redemption in this story. There was only consequence and choice, and the understanding that love sometimes means accepting darkness as part of the bargain. Outside the windows, Istanbul burned with light, and inside our private sanctuary, we held each other in the dark. He was still dangerous. He would always be dangerous. But he was also mine, and I was also his. And we would spend the rest of our lives learning what it meant to build a life on the foundation of violence, that neither of us could quite bring ourselves to abandon, because that was love I understood, not the fantasy of it, but the reality, and I had chosen it completely.